The chamber was silent and unnatural, suffocating silence that seemed to stretch far longer than the ticking seconds on the clock. Members of Congress, so often quick with interruptions, chatter, and performance, were frozen in place. Eyes widened, papers lay still. Even the clicking of cameras slowed, as if the lensmen themselves were stunned by what they had just witnessed. Jasmine Crockett had spoken only a handful of words, delivered without tremor, without hesitation. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. Cold, sharp, and final, it cut through the room like steel sliding against stone. In that moment, the lawsuit that Karoline Leavitt thought she could plead away was transformed into something larger, heavier, immovable. The reaction was immediate. A low murmur swelled from the back benches. One lawmaker's jaw dropped. Another leaned in to whisper to a colleague, but found no words. It wasn't simply what Crockett had said. It was the manner in which she said it. The calmness, the certainty, the refusal to be shaken by Leavitt's trembling plea. For a split second, Leavitt herself seemed unsure of what had just happened. Her lips parted as if she might argue further, but no sound came. The very act of begging, desperate, visible, undeniable, had stripped her of the posture she had spent years building. And standing opposite her was a woman who understood that. Silence, paired with precision, could be more devastating than the loudest roar. Gasps turned into whispers, whispers into shocked exchanges. Some in the chamber shifted uncomfortably, aware they had just witnessed a line being drawn, the kind of line that cannot be erased. Crockett's refusal was not merely a legal statement. It was a declaration that no amount of pressure, pleading, or political theater would dissolve the weight of accountability. Journalists clutched their notepads, already scribbling headlines that would dominate the evening cycle. Staffers texted feverishly, knowing the clip would go viral before they even left the building.
Ow.
The air itself seemed charged. It's a kind of electricity that precedes a THUND RCLAP. What just happened in these halls left even seasoned lawmakers speechless. And yet, this was not the beginning of the story, far from it. But to understand how we got here, you need to see the desperation that drove Karoline Leavitt to beg on the floor of Congress. $80 million. It wasn't just a number scribbled on a lawsuit, it was a symbol, a test, a battlefield. In the sterile language of legal filings, the case might have seemed like just another dispute, another line item in the endless grind of politics. But inside that chamber, the weight of the lawsuit pressed down like an invisible gavel. For Karoline Leavitt, it represented the looming collapse of her credibility. For Jasmine Crockett, it was the stand she refused to abandon. This was never just about money. $80 million could rebuild schools, could fund hospitals, could secure clean water for entire communities. But here in the marble halls of Congress, it stood for something even greater. Whether power can be bought, begged, or bullied into submission, or whether truth holds fast against the storm. The cameras caught every flicker of the moment. Progressives, immigrants, and working-class families watching from living rooms across America. It wasn't just two women clashing over a figure. It was a confrontation over dignity itself. To walk away from this lawsuit would be to teach a dangerous lesson that those with access, connections, or audacity could erase accountability with a single desperate plea. And millions knew that if arrogance could win here, it could win anywhere. Crockett's refusal was rooted in something deeper than legal strategy. She understood what many outside those walls felt every day: rules bent for the powerful, doors slammed in the faces of ordinary people. Her stance was not just professional, it was personal, collective, generational. When she stood her ground, she carried the weight of communities who had been told to lower their heads, to let it go, to settle for less. The lawsuit became more than paperwork, became a mirror. Viewers saw themselves in it, the worker fighting for unpaid wages, the immigrant family resisting eviction, the young activist demanding fairness in systems stacked against them. Each person who felt dismissed by authority recognized something of their own battle in Crockett's refusal to fold. The stakes were not abstract. They were human, immediate, alive. And for Leavitt, the implications were catastrophic. To lose meant not only financial ruin, but political humiliation. To drop the lawsuit was her only escape hatch. She knew it, and in her desperation, she gambled that Crockett might bend to political pressure, to personal appeals, to the illusion of unity. But Crockett didn't bend. It's not even an inch. That's why this moment mattered far beyond the legal system. If the lawsuit stood, it meant that truth had teeth, that accountability wasn't a myth, but a force even politicians had to respect. If it fell, it would affirm the cynicism that so many Americans already carried, that rules are made to be broken, the game is rigged, that begging and bullying are more effective than justice itself. Millions of Americans watching saw their own struggles mirrored in this moment. And when Crockett's cold refusal echoed across the chamber, it wasn't just Leavitt who felt the sting, it was every arrogant voice that had ever told, someone powerless to simply give up. And then, just when it seemed routine, when it looked like another debate that would dissolve into talking points and posturing, Karoline Leavitt made a move no one expected. Karoline Leavitt built her brand on being loud. Not just vocal, not just opinionated, loud. She was the kind of political figure who could turn a 5-minute television slot into a viral clip. The kind who thrived on sound bites, sharp enough to pierce through the noise of cable news. Her allies called it confidence. Her critics called it arrogance. Either way, it defined her. From the beginning, Leavitt's ambition was clear. She was young, driven, and unafraid to take swings at bigger names. While others played the long game, waiting for their turn in the spotlight, she stormed onto the stage demanding attention. It worked for a while. Networks booked her. Donors rallied behind her firebrand persona. Headlines framed her as the rising star of a hard-edged brand of politics. And Karoline leaned into it, sharp tongue always ready, smiling only when the cameras caught her mid-attack. But behind the bravado was a different story. Colleagues whispered about the strain, about moments when the cameras were off and Leavitt's confidence cracked. Staffers noticed the clenched jaw, the late-night calls, the quiet frustration of someone who had built a tower on shaky ground. For all the swagger, she carried the gnawing awareness that politics is a game of perception, and perception can turn in an instant. Still, she wore arrogance like armor. When confronted, she didn't engage, she belittled. Opponents were weak, uninformed, irrelevant. In hearings, she rolled her eyes. In interviews, she dismissed questions with a smirk. She learned quickly that insults drew more headlines than policy. She believed headlines were power. Her greatest weapon was performance, but performance has limits. In one interview, she brushed off concerns about accountability with a laugh, saying these lawsuits are nothing but distractions. The clip went viral not in her favor, but against her. Critics pounced on her dismissiveness, while her supporters doubled down, praising her for owning her critics. What she didn't realize then was that each flippant dismissal was carving cracks into her foundation. The contradictions grew starker as time passed. On stage, she projected untouchable confidence. Behind closed doors, she confided to trusted aides about the mounting costs, the legal risks, the headlines she couldn't control. The lawsuit wasn't just a legal battle. It was a specter haunting her every step. And the more she felt cornered, the louder she became. It was arrogance masquerading as strength. Every insult aimed at Crockett, every sneer at those who questioned her motives, was a tell. Instead of convincing the country she was in control, she revealed how desperate she truly was. The louder she spoke, the weaker her case truly was. And yet she couldn't stop herself. Her political identity was built on attack. Backing down would feel like betrayal to the brand she had created. She doubled down on bravado, filling her speeches with sharp barbs and dismissive laughter. She claimed the lawsuit was a joke, that her opponents were pathetic. But each statement only fed the perception that she was scrambling, that she was whistling past the graveyard of her own credibility. In Congress, she tried to wield the same strategy. A raised voice here, a pointed insult there. But in that setting, with Crockett opposite her, the performance rang hollow. Viewers didn't see confidence. They saw desperation dressed in arrogance. And Leavitt herself seemed to sense it, her once cutting lines bouncing off, Crockett's calm exterior like dull blades. This was the contradiction that defined her downfall. A woman who built her power on volume now, finding that Crockett's silence was louder still. The bravado that once made her appear strong, now made her look fragile. Every word became evidence, not of dominance, but of unraveling. And in the end, that unraveling was inevitable. Arrogance can shield for only so long before it exposes what lies beneath. Karoline Leavitt believed she could beg without consequence. That the same bravado that won her headlines could spare her from accountability. But arrogance has a way of writing its own downfall. And Jasmine Crockett was waiting. Jasmine Crockett's story was never one of privilege. She was not born into influence, nor handed the golden keys to opportunity. Rise began in neighborhoods where struggle was not an exception but the rule, where grit was the only currency that truly mattered. The daughter of grit, raised in a household that taught her the value of work, dignity, and truth, she absorbed early lessons that would later carry her through storms far fiercer than any courtroom battle. Her path to public life was not paved with handshakes and shortcuts. It was built on the endless hours she poured into defending people others overlooked. When Crockett chose law, she didn't chase lucrative firms or corporate boardrooms. She chose the community, standing in courtrooms where the defendants were poor, the cases messy, and the odds stacked. She defended not the powerful, but the powerless. Each file she picked up carried a face, a story, a family who had been told they had no chance. It was here that she learned her greatest strength, unshakable composure. Judges, prosecutors, and even opposing lawyers often tried to rattle her. They raised their voices. They questioned her competence. They tried every tactic of intimidation, but Crockett never flinched. She discovered that her calm, her silence, even could disarm more effectively than any outburst. While others burned themselves out with theatrics, she quietly dismantled arguments piece by piece, letting the weight of truth do the heavy lifting. That calmness was not a mask, it was survival. From her earliest days, she knew what it felt like to be underestimated. She had been dismissed for her youth, her gender, her background. She had been told implicitly and explicitly that she did not belong. Instead of breaking under it, she turned it into fuel. She walked into every room as if she belonged because she knew the communities she represented had no voice if she didn't. Her perseverance became legend among those who followed her work. There were easier paths she could have taken, yet time and again she chose the harder one, the one that kept her tethered to her values. When presented with offers to leave grassroots law for cushier positions, she declined. When told to stay quiet to avoid political blowback, she spoke louder not in tone, but in conviction. And when faced with the temptation to compromise dignity for convenience, she refused. One story, often repeated by those who admire her, captures this spirit. In a tense local case, a prosecutor openly mocked one of her clients in front of the court. Banking on silence from the defense, Crockett, composed as ever, rose without raising her voice. She simply laid out the facts, dismantling the arrogance line by line until the mockery turned into red-faced silence. She didn't just win the case, she won respect. She did it not with fury, but with calm dignity. That was always her gift. She was the kind of leader who didn't just argue for herself, but for the people who couldn't speak. When she spoke, she carried others with her. And when she refused to bend, she reminded millions that dignity could be armor stronger than wealth, stronger than privilege, stronger even than power itself. As she transitioned from the courtroom to Congress, Crockett carried this same energy. The stakes were larger, the cameras brighter, the scrutiny relentless, yet nothing in her demeanor shifted. The same calm steeliness that unnerved prosecutors now unsettled arrogant colleagues. While others postured for headlines, she stayed grounded in the work. While they chased noise, she built trust. Her resilience became her brand, though she never sought to brand herself at all. To progressives, to immigrants, to working class Americans, Crockett symbolized a rare kind of authenticity. She wasn't polished into a caricature. She was battle-tested into a leader. People who had been ignored saw in her someone who refused to look away. People who had been silenced saw in her a voice they could claim as their own. And so when Karoline Leavitt walked into Congress armed with insults, demands, and ultimately desperation. Crockett's presence alone shifted the balance. For every raised voice, Crockett had silence. For every insult, she had a calm fact. For every plea, she had principle. Her story made this moment inevitable. A woman forged in struggle, disciplined by law, and guided by dignity could not be shaken by theatrics. Crockett understood something Leavitt never could. True strength does not scream, it stands. And that's why when Leavitt tried to beg, Crockett's silence alone carried more weight than any words. The chamber felt less like a debate hall and more like a pressure cooker. Karoline Leavitt's voice filled the space, sharp at first, then shaky, then rising again, as if sheer volume could restore the ground slipping beneath her feet. She leaned forward, her papers rattling, her words tumbling over one another. One moment she was pleading, the next she was sneering, as if she couldn't decide whether to charm or to bully her way out of the corner she had backed into. Across from her sat Jasmine Crockett, still as stone. Her eyes followed Leavitt's movements with the patience of someone watching a performance they'd already seen too many times before. She didn't interrupt. She didn't flinch. She didn't so much as shift in her chair. And that stillness became unbearable. Every insult Leavitt lobbed seemed to crash into the silence and echo back louder, highlighting her desperation. "You don't understand the damage this is doing," Leavitt snapped, her words cracking under the strain. "You don't see how? This lawsuit hurts more than just MIT hurts this body. It hurts this country." No answer. Just Crockett's steady gaze. Leavitt pressed harder. "Do you want to be remembered as the one who divided us? No. Do you want history to see you as the reason opportunity was lost?" Again, no reply. Just that calm, unreadable stare. The imbalance was striking. Viewers watching the broadcast could feel it viscerally. One woman clung to control with shaking hands, while the other embodied control simply by refusing to play the game. It wasn't Crockett's words that shook the chamber, it was her refusal to waste them. The pleas became insults. The insults became pleas, a tangled mess of contradiction. Leavitt tried everything: outrage, guilt, charm, even a forced laugh that broke midway into a trembling quiver. It only deepened the contrast. She looked frantic, cornered, unraveling. Crockett looked composed, her silence cutting deeper than any rebuke could. The audience at home saw it too. Social media lit up in real time. Clips of Leavitt's raised voice spliced against Crockett's steady calm. Captions like "strength versus chaos" spreading faster than the live feed could refresh. The imbalance wasn't just visible, it was undeniable. Inside the chamber, even those who once sympathized with Leavitt began to avert their eyes, uncomfortable with the spectacle. Whispers ran along the benches. Some lawmakers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. It was the kind of silence that belongs not to indifference, but to tension so thick that every breath seemed heavy. Leavitt slammed her palm against the desk. Last card, a trembling demand. "I am asking no. I am begging you to reconsider." The words hung in the air, an admission more damning than any accusation Crockett could have spoken. A woman once branded as bold, defiant, untouchable had crumbled into desperation in front of the nation. And then Crockett moved. Slowly, she straightened her posture, leaned forward just slightly, her gaze never wavering. The anticipation rippled through the room like a chill. Even before she spoke, everyone knew the silence was about to break. And then came the words that froze the entire chamber. The hush in the chamber was so complete that even the faint hum of the overhead lights felt louder than usual. For what felt like an eternity, Jasmine Crockett said nothing, letting Karoline Leavitt's final plea linger in the air like smoke that refused to clear. Then, at last, she leaned forward. She didn't raise her hand. She didn't demand attention. She simply began to speak, and in that instant, the entire room shifted. "Congresswoman Leavitt," she said, her voice measured, deliberate. Sharp enough to cut, but calm enough to soothe. "You've asked me to reconsider, to walk away. Pretend that $80 million is a trivial matter, that this lawsuit is simply a distraction. Let's examine that carefully." Her words fell slowly, each one distinct, separated by the kind of silence that made every listener lean in closer. Crockett's cadence was surgical. She did not ramble. She did not embellish. Laid out the truth like evidence placed neatly. On a table? $80 million, she repeated, allowing the figure to hang in the air. Not for me. Not for you. Not for political theater, but for accountability, for justice. She glanced briefly at Leavitt, whose knuckles were white. As she gripped the edge of her desk, cameras zoomed in, flashes flickering. The contrast was unbearable. Leavitt trembling, Crockett unflinching. The first point, Crockett continued, is that this lawsuit is not personal, it is institutional. It is about the rules we are sworn to uphold, the integrity of this body. To dismiss it as a distraction is to dismiss the very oaths we took to serve the American people. Pause. Eyes darted across the chamber. Some nodded almost imperceptibly. Second, Crockett said, her tone cooling further. $80 million is not an inconvenience. It is not something to be swept away with a shrug. It represents harm, real harm, to people who cannot stand in this chamber, to communities who cannot afford to hire armies of lawyers, to citizens who believe, perhaps foolishly at times, that their government still serves them. If we call it a distraction, then we tell every one of them that justice is a luxury item, that accountability has a price tag. A murmur rippled across the benches. Leavitt shifted uncomfortably, her lips twitching as though she might interject. But she didn't. The stillness of Crockett's composure left no room for interruption. Third, Crockett pressed on. Your plea here today, your begging, as you called it, reveals more than any of my arguments could. If this lawsuit were frivolous, if it lacked substance, if it truly were nothing but a nuisance, you would not be begging me to drop it. You would laugh it off, dismiss it as beneath your attention. Instead, you stand here, trembling, desperate, exposed. And that, Congresswoman, is not a defense. That is an admission. Gasps audible now. Someone in the back let out a quiet whistle before catching themselves. The cameras clicked furiously, desperate to capture Leavitt's paling face. Crockett let the silence stretch, her gaze steady on the woman across from her. Then she spoke again, softer now, but even more devastating. You asked me to choose unity over justice? What is unity built on lies? What is peace if it is purchased with silence? You asked me to compromise my oath, my dignity, the trust of the people who sent me here for your convenience. I will not. Whispers turned into low murmurs, the sound of approval surging, though no one dared to clap outright. Some leaned back, arms crossed, smirking at the spectacle of a colleague so thoroughly dismantled. Others shook their heads in disbelief, stunned by the clarity with which Crockett had just flipped the script. Leavitt's confidence crumbled visibly. Her once sharp posture sagged. Her lips parted as though she might protest, but nothing came out. Her hands fluttered to her stack of papers, shuffling without purpose. A nervous tick of someone searching for footing that no longer existed. Crockett let her flounder. She did not gloat. She did not sneer. She simply waited until the weight of the moment was undeniable. Then, with a finality that sent a chill through the room, she delivered the blow. No, Crockett said, her voice colder than it had been. All day this lawsuit stands. The words reverberated like a gavel strike. A verdict delivered not just to Leavitt, but to every person watching inside and outside the chamber. It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. The simplicity, the certainty, the refusal it was the kind of line destined to be replayed 1,000 times. Quoted, memmed, etched into the memory of political drama for years to come. The room erupted not in noise, but in reaction. Lawmakers leaned toward one another, whispering furiously. A staffer stifled a grin. Journalists scribbled furiously, already shaping headlines. Cameras flashed like fireworks. And somewhere in the chaos, suppressed applause slipped through. A few claps echoing before dying quickly. Stifled by the decorum of the chamber, Leavitt's face told the story more powerfully than any reporter could. The bravado was gone. The veneer shattered. She looked smaller, diminished. Her plea transformed into a symbol of weakness rather than strength. Crockett had not just refused Hershey, had turned her desperation into evidence, her begging into confession. And still, Crockett sat unmoved, unbothered, collected. She had not raised her voice, not once. She had not broken a sweat.
Yet she
had delivered the kind of counterattack that rewrites reputations, defines careers, that echoes through history. But if you thought the room was stunned, wait until you see what happened next. The moment Jasmine Crockett uttered the words, "No, this lawsuit stands," it didn't just end a confrontation. It detonated a political earthquake. Within minutes, the chamber was buzzing with barely contained chatter. But outside those walls, the shockwaves spread faster than anyone could have predicted. Headlines began rolling across. News tickers before the session had even adjourned. Crockett freezes Congress. Leavitt begs, gets denied. $80 million mic drop. Anchors on cable news replayed the footage on loop, their voices tinged with disbelief, like commentators describing a knockout punch in the final round of a fight. No one expected to end so suddenly. And then came social media. Hashtags erupted. Hashtag Crockett stands. Hashtag begging in Congress. Hashtag 80 million reasons. TikTok stitched Crockett's icy calm with slow emotion edits of Leavitt's unraveling. Memes plastered the internet, split-screen images of Crockett's composure. Beside Leavitt's desperation, captioned with lines like "Grace versus grovel" and "When silence speaks louder than screams," reels and shorts took the clip viral, with everyday Americans adding their voices. She didn't even raise her voice. It's how you know she won. Crockett just spoke for every person who's ever been told to let it go when the truth mattered. This wasn't politics. This was justice on live TV. Late-night hosts had their say too. One quipped, "You know you've hit rock bottom when your plea on the House floor gets turned into a TikTok dance trend." The audience roared. Another joked, "Forget filibusters, Crockett invented the freeze-buster." Laughter rolled, but beneath the humor was a clear acknowledgement. Something rare had just happened in Washington. The ripple effect inside Congress was immediate. Lawmakers who had once hesitated to align with Crockett suddenly stepped forward. Behind closed doors, colleagues whispered about her steeliness, about the way she carried the fight not just for herself but for principle. Allies praised her restraint. Rivals privately admitted, sometimes begrudgingly, sometimes with awe, that she had outclassed Leavitt in every way. Donors noticed too. Campaign coffers swelled as small-dollar contributions poured in, often accompanied by notes like, "Thank you for standing tall, and this is why we believe in you." Major backers who had been watching from the sidelines began calling. Staffers eager to attach their names to what they now saw as a rising star. The $80 million was no longer just the subject of a lawsuit. It became a symbol, a rallying cry. But perhaps the most powerful ripple was cultural, not financial. Young people, often cynical about politics, clipped the moment and shared it like a badge of pride. Students posted reaction videos saying, "Finally, someone who doesn't cave." Immigrant families saw in Crockett's calm defiance a mirror of their own struggles. Staying composed under pressure, refusing to bow when asked to compromise dignity for comfort. In barbershops, in classrooms, in group chats, people repeated her words like a mantra. This lawsuit stands. For many, Crockett's composure was more than just political theater. It was personal validation. Viewers who had been dismissed, ignored, or told to move on in their own lives, saw themselves vindicated in her refusal to back down. They saw strength without arrogance, resolve without cruelty. And in a moment where so many politicians seemed hollow, scripted, transactional, Crockett's authenticity radiated like a flare. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt found herself at the center of a very different storm. Editorials skewered her desperation. Commentators replayed her trembling voice against Crockett's calm, describing it as the embodiment of hubris colliding with humility. One viral tweet captured the sentiment in just 6 words. She begged. Crockett didn't even blink. The chamber had quieted, but the nation was anything but quiet. Every replay, every headline, every meme seemed to widen the chasm between the two women, one embodying desperation, the other resolve. Crockett wasn't just winning an argument. She was winning a narrative, shaping a story that would outlast the moment itself. and as the dust settled, a deeper truth began to shine through. In the hours after the confrontation, as the firestorm of headlines and hashtags continued to ripple, Jasmine Crockett herself offered the clearest lens through which to understand what had truly happened. She spoke not with the flourish of someone eager to gloat, nor with the venom of someone eager to wound. Instead, she spoke with the quiet gravity of a woman who knew she had been entrusted with something larger than her own career. Justice cannot be begged away. And in those 5 words, the drama of the chamber crystallized into a truth that millions recognized in their bones. This was never just about $80 million. It was about the temptation, the constant temptation to turn principles into bargaining chips. To say, let it go. To say, it's easier this way. To say, don't rock the boat. Leavitt had embodied that temptation in its rawest form, publicly pleading not to uphold justice, but to erase it for convenience, for power, for self-preservation. But Crockett reframed the entire moment. She reminded the country that integrity does not bow to theatrics. Dignity does not crumble under pressure. In truth, however uncomfortable, cannot be erased by desperation. The contrast was striking. On one side, Leavitt's unraveling, frantic. Pleas, shifting tones, the visible panic of someone watching her own narrative collapse. On the other, Crockett, unshaken, measured. The embodiment of a simple but profound lesson that the louder desperation grows, the more it reveals its own. Weakness, the principle, echoed far beyond that chamber. People who had once been told to stay quiet at work, to let it slide in their communities, to stop making waves in their personal lives, now heard in Crockett's stance an invitation to stand taller, to see dignity not as a luxury, but as a necessity. Because in that chamber, it wasn't just one lawsuit at stake, it was the soul of accountability in America. Would power continue to dictate who pays a price and who escapes it? Or would principle rise above pleading, showing that truth once spoken cannot be bargained away? Crockett answered that question without ever raising her voice. The emotional weight of her refusal struck a chord that facts alone could not. It told viewers that strength is not measured in how loud you shout, but in how firmly you stand. It told immigrants, workers, students, families, that when the world tries to pressure you into silence, your refusal to yield is itself a victory. And, in that way, what happened on the House floor transcended politics. It became part of a larger movement, a larger awakening. Viewers were not just spectators. They were participants, woven into a story about accountability, about dignity, about refusing to trade away what matters most. The lesson was clear. Justice is not something to be pleaded down, chipped away, or negotiated into irrelevance. Justice demands courage. Justice demands endurance. And justice, once declared, must be upheld not for the comfort of the powerful, but for the protection of the people. Crockett's stance reminded America that the fight for integrity is not fought in a single speech or a single courtroom. It is fought every day in every space where truth is tested. And when she refused to bend, she showed the nation that sometimes the most powerful form of resistance is calm, unwavering presence. As viewers replayed the moment, they saw more than a congresswoman denying a desperate rival. They saw themselves. They saw their own struggles for respect, their own battles against arrogance, their own need for courage reflected back at them. And in that reflection, they felt a spark of empowerment, understanding that they, too, were part of a movement, bigger than the moment itself. Because the truth is simple, and Crockett's composure made it undeniable. Justice cannot be begged away. And when we remember that, when we live that, we begin to reclaim something even greater, the soul of accountability in America. Karoline Leavitt begged. Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. That moment, frozen in time, said more than hours of debate ever could. It was a clash of desperation against dignity, of trembling words against steady silence, and, in the end, it proved a simple truth. Justice does not kneel before power. The lesson lingers, not just in the halls of Congress, but in the hearts of everyone who watched. It told us that no matter how loud arrogance becomes, calm integrity will always cut sharper. It reminded us that dignity endures longer than theatrics, and that truth once spoken cannot be erased. No matter how many voices try to beg it away, this was more than politics. It was a mirror, reflecting the struggles of everyday people, who know what it feels like to be pressured, dismissed, or told to step aside. And it was a promise that strength isn't found in noise, but in the courage to stand firm when it matters most. If moments like this inspire you, hit subscribe. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that justice doesn't bow to power. Be part of a community that believes in accountability, in dignity, and in the truth that cannot be silenced. Because history is written not by those who beg, but by those who stand firm.